Sir, I believe you may be in the wrong section of the aircraft. Economy boarding is further down the jet bridge. The words hung in the air of Sky Globe Airlines, first-class cabin, precise and pointed. Diane Foster, the senior flight attendant, delivered them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a practiced expression that conveyed politeness while simultaneously suggesting correction was imminent. Xavier Thompson lowered The Economist he'd been reading and looked up. At 42, he possessed a stillness that most mistook for aloofness. In reality, it was the hard-won composure of a man who had spent his life navigating spaces that weren't designed to welcome him. "I'm exactly where I should be," Xavier replied, voice measured as he gestured to seat 2A. "This is my assigned seat." Around them, the first-class cabin of Flight 347 from New York to London hummed with pre-departure energy. A silver-haired venture capitalist tapped away at his laptop. A Hollywood actress scrolled through Instagram with practiced indifference. A tech entrepreneur sipped his second glass of champagne before takeoff. Xavier had boarded early, his movements deliberate and unhurried. His charcoal Tom Ford suit fit his athletic frame perfectly expensive but understated. His Oxfords gleamed with a subtle polish. The titanium Patek Philippe on his wrist was slim, elegant, and cost more than some cars. None of it was flashy. All of it was impeccable. For Xavier, this flight was meant to be a rare moment of quiet. He had just closed a billion-dollar acquisition of Nexus Robotics, a struggling tech firm that his company Onyx Capital Partners would transform into an industry leader within 18 months. The deal had kept him in New York for 3 weeks of intense negotiations. Now he was headed to London to brief his European team. Onyx Capital, which Xavier had built from a small office with second-hand furniture into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse, specialized in finding undervalued companies with untapped potential. His reputation was sterling, disciplined, innovative, and unerringly precise. The first-class cabin was Xavier's momentary sanctuary, a place to decompress, to transition from one phase of work to another. Or at least it should have been. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Diane's voice had a hint of skepticism that scraped against Xavier's calm. Without sighing, though he wanted to, Xavier reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved the crisp boarding pass. He handed it to her, maintaining eye contact. Diane examined it with unusual scrutiny, turning it over as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. The cabin had gone quiet. The venture capitalist glanced up from his spreadsheets. The actress had stopped scrolling. "Everything seems to be in order." Diane finally conceded her tone, suggesting this was somehow surprising. She handed the boarding pass back. "Sometimes passengers get confused about their seating assignments." Xavier returned the boarding pass to his pocket. "No confusion here," he said, voice still calm, despite the familiar tightening in his chest. This wasn't his first encounter with what he privately called positional questioning, the subtle but persistent challenging of his right to occupy premium spaces. A memory flashed unbidden Xavier at 17, wearing his best suit, being followed by security through an upscale Chicago department store while shopping for his Yale interview. The same assumptions, just a different setting. He pushed the memory away. Diane nodded stiffly and continued down the aisle, offering warm greetings to other first-class passengers. Xavier closed his eyes briefly. He wouldn't let this minor friction disturb his equilibrium. He was a master of compartmentalization, separating irritations from objectives, reactions from strategy. He slipped on his noise-canceling headphones, selected Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, and focused on the music's mathematical precision, letting it wash away the interaction. The sanctuary lasted exactly 7 minutes. "Sir, I need to ask you to place your briefcase in the overhead compartment. It cannot remain on the floor during takeoff and landing." Xavier opened his eyes to find Diane standing over him again, her smile now tight at the edges. He glanced down at his slim leather briefcase tucked neatly under the seat in front of him, precisely as per airline regulations. It wasn't protruding into the aisle. It wasn't oversized. It was exactly where it was supposed to be. "It's properly stowed," Xavier responded, removing one headphone. "It's under the seat in the designated storage area." Diane's posture stiffened. "It's a safety hazard, sir," she insisted, her voice gaining a sharp parental tone. "All large bags must go in the overhead bins." Xavier looked pointedly at the seat across the aisle where the tech entrepreneur had a bulky backpack positioned exactly as Xavier's briefcase was under the seat in front of him. Diane had walked past it without comment. "With all due respect," Xavier said, keeping his voice measured, "my bag is correctly stowed according to FAA and your own airline's guidelines. The gentleman in 2C has a larger bag in the same position." Diane's eyes flicked briefly to the other passenger, then back to Xavier. A flush of pink crept up her neck. The interaction had shifted. She was being challenged, and she clearly didn't appreciate it. "Sir, I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft," she said, her volume rising slightly. "My instructions regarding safety protocols are not up for debate. Please place your briefcase in the overhead bin now, or I'll need to involve the captain." The threat was absurdly disproportionate, and they both knew it. This wasn't about the briefcase. It was about authority, specifically her discomfort with his presence in a space she unconsciously believed he didn't belong in. The entire exchange was playing out before the first-class cabin. The venture capitalist was now openly watching. The actress had her phone tilted slightly, possibly recording. The tech entrepreneur seemed torn between embarrassment and fascination with the unfolding drama. Xavier was a strategist above all else. He rapidly calculated potential outcomes. Escalating would brand him with the angry black man stereotype, validating Diane's implicit narrative. Compliance while grading was the path of least resistance. With deliberate movements, he retrieved his briefcase, stood, and placed it in the empty overhead bin. He returned to his seat and met Diane's gaze directly. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said stiffly before turning to offer the tech entrepreneur another glass of champagne with a warm smile. Xavier closed his eyes again, but Bach's mathematical precision no longer soothed. A cold, controlled anger had begun to crystallize in his chest. This flight was meant to be his reset, his transition between conquests. Instead, he was being disciplined like a wayward child for a violation that only existed in Diane's mind. As boarding continued, Captain James Holloway completed his pre-flight checks in the cockpit. At 57, Holloway was a 29-year veteran of commercial aviation with over 18,000 flight hours. His salt and pepper hair and stern jaw projected the authority passengers found reassuring in turbulence. Holloway ran his flights with military precision. He believed in clear hierarchies and trusted his crew implicitly. Passenger complaints about his flight attendants were, in his experience, usually the result of entitled customers who didn't understand aviation protocols. He considered his job to be flying the plane safely, not managing customer service disputes. In his 29 years as a pilot, Holloway had developed certain biases he would never admit to having. When he heard disruptive passenger, he formed a mental image before ever seeing the person. He prided himself on being fair, but his definition of fairness was shaped by his limited worldview and experiences. Meanwhile, in the corporate headquarters of SkyGlobe Airlines CEO Richard Montgomery reviewed quarterly projections with his executive team. At 62, Montgomery had spent his entire career in the airline industry, climbing the ranks through operations and finance before reaching the top position 8 years ago. Montgomery was old school, a numbers-driven executive who prioritized on-time performance and operational efficiency over customer experience innovations. He believed strongly in procedure and protocol. Discrimination complaints were handled by HR and rarely reached his desk. When they did, they were typically addressed with form letter apologies and travel vouchers, a cost of doing business in the customer service industry. Montgomery had faced 3 discrimination lawsuits during his tenure as CEO. All had been settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements and modest payouts. He considered them nuisances rather than indications of a deeper problem. He was more concerned with fuel costs and labor negotiations than with how his flight attendants treated passengers of color. None of them, Diane Foster, Captain Holloway, or Richard Montgomery, had any idea that their lives were about to intersect with Xavier Thompson's in ways that would permanently alter their trajectories. The final boarding announcements echoed through the terminal. In first class, Xavier was on a brief call with his London office manager confirming his car service from Heathrow. "I'll see you at the terminal, Rachel." "Thanks," he said, ending the call and immediately switching his phone to airplane mode. Diane appeared at his row again, arms crossed. "Sir, all electronic devices need to be in airplane mode now. We're preparing for pushback." "As you can see," Xavier said, holding up his screen displaying the airplane icon, "I've already complied with that requirement." Diane's lips thinned. "I don't appreciate your tone, sir. You've been problematic since you boarded." The word hit Xavier like a physical blow. He who had built an empire on precision, on discipline, on impeccable conduct, was being labeled problematic for sitting quietly in a seat he had paid for. "And I," Xavier replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless carried weight, "do not appreciate being harassed. I have followed every rule. Your issue is not with my bag or my phone. It's with me, and I will not be spoken to this way." Diane's face flushed deeper. "That's it. I'm getting the captain." She disappeared into the cockpit. The atmosphere in the cabin had changed from witnessing an uncomfortable exchange to witnessing a confrontation. Passengers exchanged glances. The venture capitalist looked away, suddenly engrossed in his laptop. The tech entrepreneur shifted uncomfortably. Lucia Morales, the fashion model who had boarded after Xavier, had been quietly observing the entire interaction from her seat in 3B. At 34, Lucia had witnessed and experienced enough discriminatory behavior in her industry to recognize it instantly. She discreetly adjusted her phone, ensuring it was still recording. "Is this normal?" she whispered to the businessman beside her. "I've flown first class dozens of times and never seen a flight attendant act like this." The man shook his head slightly. "Not in my experience. Something else is going on here." Minutes later, Diane returned with Captain Holloway. The captain's face was impassive, his body language projecting authority. He stood in the aisle next to Xavier's seat, hands clasped behind his back. Sir Holloway began, his voice flat and emotionless. "My flight attendant informs me you've been causing a disturbance and refusing to follow crew instructions." Xavier met his gaze evenly. "That is a complete mischaracterization, Captain. Your flight attendant has singled me out, applied inconsistent standards, and harassed me since I boarded. I have complied with every legitimate request." Holloway listened, but his expression made it clear he wasn't really hearing. He was processing this as a problem that needed to be solved quickly to ensure an on-time departure. His flight attendant was a known quantity, a trusted team member. Xavier was a variable in the rigid hierarchy of commercial aviation. The captain glanced around, taking in the other passengers, all of whom avoided eye contact except for Lucia, who was openly recording now. Her bold stare made him momentarily uncomfortable, but he brushed it aside. "My crew is responsible for the safety and security of this flight." Holloway stated, his tone final. "Ms. Foster has expressed concerns about your behavior and compliance. Her judgment is what matters here. We can't have this kind of friction on a 7-hour flight. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to deplane." The words hung in the air, stunning in their absolutism. "You're removing me from the flight?" Xavier asked, incredulity breaking through his composed exterior. "For what? For having my bag exactly where everyone else has theirs? For already having my phone in airplane mode when asked I'm removing you because my crew feels unsafe?" The captain stated, his face a granite mask. "We have a zero-tolerance policy." Xavier felt a cold wave of recognition wash over him. This wasn't the first time he'd been deemed unsafe simply for expecting equal treatment. At 32, he had been asked to leave a high-end restaurant in Boston when he politely questioned why his reservation had been given away while white diners without reservations were seated. The manager had used the same word, unsafe, as if dignity and self-respect were somehow threatening. The venture capitalist now looked deeply uncomfortable. Lucia had her phone aimed directly at the confrontation, no longer pretending she wasn't documenting everything. Several other passengers had phones out as well. Xavier felt a surge of white-hot fury. It rose from his core, threatening to break through his carefully maintained composure, but he contained it. Rage was a blunt instrument. He preferred a scalpel. He stood slowly, the impeccable tailoring of his suit in stark contrast to the ugliness of the situation. He collected his coat from the overhead bin, along with the briefcase that had somehow become contraband in Diane's eyes. Captain Xavier said, making direct eye contact with Holloway, "I want you to understand something. You are making a grave mistake." It wasn't delivered as a threat. It was stated as a fact with the same certainty with which he might describe gravity or sunrise. It was a promise of a future reckoning that Holloway in his comfortable authority could not possibly comprehend. 2 airport security officers appeared at the front of the cabin. They were respectful but firm as they approached Xavier. "Sir, we need you to come with us, please," the taller officer said. Xavier looked around the cabin one last time, at Diane's smug expression of triumph, at Captain Holloway's detached professionalism, at the passengers who wouldn't meet his eyes, at Lucia still recording. He nodded once and walked toward the exit, dignity intact. As he moved through the economy section toward the front exit, he felt the stares of passengers who were trying to piece together why a well-dressed man was being escorted off the plane. Some looked curious, others embarrassed. A few showed flickers of knowing recognition. As he reached the door, he heard Diane mutter something to the captain, thinking he was out of earshot. It's always people like him. 4 words that contained volumes. The jet bridge felt impossibly long as Xavier walked between the 2 security officers. Neither spoke to him, which he appreciated. This wasn't their doing, and they were simply following procedure. Still, the public nature of his removal burned like acid. "I need to collect my checked luggage," Xavier said as they reached the terminal. "Yes, sir," the shorter officer replied. "We'll escort you to baggage services so they can retrieve it for you." His removal was being handled with procedural correctness, which somehow made the underlying injustice even more stark. The system was working as designed, and that was precisely the problem. As they waited at baggage services, Xavier's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I recorded everything that happened. This was wrong. Let me know if you need the video. Lucia Morales, passenger in 3B. Xavier responded with a simple, "Thank you," and saved her contact information. He hadn't planned on fighting this battle, but evidence was always valuable. 40 minutes later, Xavier stood outside JFK Terminal 4, his suitcase beside him, watching Sky Globe Flight 347 taxi toward the runway without him on board. The sky was darkening, winter clouds gathering on the horizon. A cold wind whipped across the pickup area, but Xavier barely felt it. He wasn't standing there as a victim. He was standing there as a strategist who had just been handed a new, unexpected, and deeply personal objective. The Nexus Robotics acquisition was yesterday's victory. Today, Xavier Thompson had identified a new target. He wasn't going to just get an apology. He was going to buy the airline. Xavier pulled out his phone and called his driver, who had dropped him off barely 2 hours ago. "Marcus, I need you back at JFK Terminal 4, he said. "Change of plans. I won't be going to London tonight." His next call was to Olivia Ramirez, his second-in-command at Onyx Capital. At 37, Olivia was a Stanford MBA with a mind like a steel trap and loyalty to Xavier that was absolute. Where Xavier was the visionary strategist, Olivia was the master of execution. Olivia. He said, his voice clipped and precise change of plans. I'm not flying to London tonight. Book me a suite at the Peninsula and get Dominic Parker to meet me there in 1 hour. You too. What happened? Olivia asked, instantly alert. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in Xavier's tone over their 7 years of working together. I'll brief you both when you get there. Let's just say I've encountered an unexpected investment opportunity. Xavier ended the call and looked back at the terminal building, its glass facade reflecting the darkening sky. Most people who experienced what he had just been through felt powerless. They filed complaints that disappeared into corporate voids. They posted on social media and received empty apologies. Xavier Thompson was not most people. He had something they didn't, the capacity to reshape reality instead of merely responding to it. He hailed a taxi. The Peninsula Hotel, please. In the plush confines of the Peninsula's executive suite, Xavier had changed from his travel clothes into fresh attire, charcoal slacks, and a cashmere sweater when Olivia Ramirez and Dominic Parker arrived. Xavier had ordered a light spread of food, knowing none of them had eaten dinner, and a bottle of Macallan 25, which remained unopened on the sideboard. Olivia's sharp eyes took in Xavier's changed clothing and the untouched whiskey. This isn't a celebration, she observed. What happened? Dominic Parker Onyx's 45-year-old chief legal officer set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. A former prosecutor turned corporate attorney, Dominic had the precise mind of someone who viewed the legal code not as a constraint, but as a playground where advantage could be created. Sit down, Xavier said. I want to tell you about my flight, or rather my non-flight. Over the next 20 minutes, Xavier recounted the entire incident in meticulous detail, from Diane's first condescending question to Captain Holloway's dismissive judgment. He included the phrase he'd overheard as he was leaving. It's always people like him. When he finished, the suite was silent. Olivia's expression had hardened into a mask of controlled anger. Dominic was already thinking like a lawyer, his mind cataloging causes of action, precedents, damages. This is textbook discrimination, Dominic said, breaking the silence. It's an open and shut case, Xavier. We'll sue them into oblivion. We'll depose the flight attendant, the captain, every passenger who witnessed it. We'll subpoena their records, their HR files, their training materials. Sky Globe will be writing you a check with so many zeros it'll look like binary code. Xavier turned from where he'd been standing by the window, his eyes dark and focused. A check. Do you think this is about money? Dominic, punitive damages. Dominic corrected. It's about making them pay. Making them pay a fine is just a cost of doing business. Xavier countered, his voice low and intense. They'll issue a boilerplate apology, fire the flight attendant maybe, and implement some meaningless sensitivity training that everyone will sleep through. The board will approve the settlement. Their stock will dip for a week and then recover. The captain will keep his job. The CEO will keep his bonus. And the fundamental issues that allowed this to happen remain intact. Nothing actually changes. He set down the glass of water he'd been holding. I'm not interested in damages. I'm interested in damage. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with understanding. She knew how Xavier's mind worked. He didn't just play the game. He changed the rules. What are you thinking? She asked. A lawsuit is asking for justice. I'm in a position to dispense it, Xavier replied. He turned to Olivia. Sky Globe Airlines. Who are they? Olivia already had her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. Sky Globe Airlines Inc., publicly traded on the NYSE, ticker symbol SKY. Market cap around $3.8 billion. Their balance sheet is decent, but their margins are razor-thin fuel costs. Labor disputes, the usual airline woes. Their CEO is Richard Montgomery, an industry lifer who's been there for decades. Who's their largest shareholder? Xavier asked. Olivia's typing paused. She squinted at the screen. That's where it gets interesting. They're not fully independent. About 58% of their stock is owned by a parent company, a holding group called Britannic Holdings Group. Britannic Holdings Group. Xavier repeated the name, tasting it. Tell me about them. British-based conglomerate, Olivia explained, pulling up charts and financial statements. Ticker BHG on the London Stock Exchange. They own Sky Globe, a luxury hotel chain, a shipping company, and several other assets. Their much bigger market cap, north of $22 billion. Run by Lord William Cavendish, she continued. Old money aristocrat inherited the chairman position from his father. Their portfolio is bloated, some winners, but a lot of dead weight. They're over-leveraged from their last acquisition, one of their competitors in the hotel space. A slow, predatory smile touched Xavier's lips. It was more perfect than he could have imagined. This wasn't just about a mid-size American airline anymore. This was about old-world power structures, the kind that trickled down, creating corporate cultures where someone like Diane Foster felt emboldened to act as she had. Lord William Cavendish Xavier mused. I imagine he's never been told his bag was a safety hazard. Dominic looked from Xavier to Olivia, his legal mind struggling to keep up with their corporate rating wavelength. What are you suggesting? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. You can't just buy a $22 billion company because you were kicked off a flight. That's disproportionate. It's potentially destructive not just to them, but possibly to us. This is emotional. Xavier, not strategic. Xavier studied Dominic carefully. Are you saying I'm being irrational, that I'm letting my feelings override my judgment? The room went silent. Dominic shifted uncomfortably. I'm saying that a corporate acquisition of this scale motivated by personal grievance carries extraordinary risks. Dominic replied carefully. As your legal counsel and your friend, I have to point that out. Xavier nodded slowly. I appreciate your candor, Dominic. I always have. But this isn't just about what happened today. He turned back to the window, looking out at the New York skyline. It's about every time someone like Diane Foster or Captain Holloway has decided someone doesn't belong, based solely on appearance. It's about accountability for systems that enable that behavior. He turned back to face them. I'm not suggesting we purchase BHG out of spite. I'm suggesting we purchase it because it represents a flawed power structure in need of reform, which happens to align with our investment strategy of identifying undervalued assets with potential for transformation. Olivia watched him carefully. And the personal motivation is the fuel, not the destination, Xavier replied. This won't be the first time a business decision had personal significance. It just happens to be more obvious in this case. Dominic still looked skeptical, but he nodded. As long as we approach this with the same strategic rigor we apply to all our acquisitions, we will, Xavier assured him. I want a full workup on Britannic Holdings Group. Every asset, every liability, every debt covenant, every major shareholder. I want to know where Lord Cavendish lunches, who his enemies are on the board, and what keeps him up at night. He walked to the center of the room, energy radiating from him. This isn't about Sky Globe anymore. Sky Globe is just a symptom. Britannic Holdings is the disease, and we are going to be the cure. This is a hostile takeover, Olivia said, the sheer audacity of it dawning on her. It'll be a bloody public war. No, Xavier corrected. A hostile takeover is a frontal assault. It's loud, it's messy, and it gives them time to build their defenses. We're not going to be soldiers. We're going to be ghosts. The plan began to form in his mind, sharp and clear. This would be a masterpiece of corporate warfare waged in shadows. Phase 1, he announced, pacing the suite. Silent accumulation. We'll use a network of shell corporations registered in obscure jurisdictions, Cayman, Liechtenstein, Panama. We'll start buying up BHG stock on the open market, small blocks at a time, staying under the 5% disclosure threshold for as long as possible. No one will see a single large buyer. They'll just see market noise. Phase 2. Destabilization. Olivia, your analysis is right. They're bloated and over-leveraged. We need to find their weakest point and press on it. Does their shipping company have exposure to new environmental regulations? Is their hotel chain vulnerable to a market downturn? We'll find that vulnerability and use our allies in the financial media to shine a very bright, very unflattering light on it. We'll feed anonymous tips to reporters at the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. We'll sow doubt. Phase 3. Alliance building. Every board has factions. Lord Cavendish, the inherited chairman, must have rivals, people who think he's a dinosaur. We find them. We find the disgruntled shareholders, the pension funds, who are unhappy with their returns. We'll approach them discreetly, show them our plan for unlocking value, for streamlining the company, for making it profitable again. We'll get them on our side before the battle even starts. And Phase 4. Dominic asked now, completely captivated despite his initial reservations. Xavier stopped in front of him, his eyes blazing with cold fire. Phase 4 is the reveal. The day we cross the disclosure threshold and file our 13D with the SEC and the London equivalent. The day Lord William Cavendish wakes up, reads the morning's financial news, and discovers that an entity he has never heard of, controlled by a man he has never met, now owns a significant stake in his family's empire. And that man is the same problematic passenger his little airline kicked off a flight. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. They wanted to put me in my place, Xavier said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. They're about to learn that my place is in the chairman's seat. The meeting in the Peninsula Suite ended near dawn. Dominic Parker was tasked with setting up the labyrinthine legal structure of shell companies. Olivia Ramirez began the deep dive into BHG's financials, her team of analysts at Onyx Capital about to be assigned the project of their lives. Xavier himself finally went to bed, but not to sleep. He lay awake replaying the scene on the plane, not with anger anymore, but with a chilling sense of clarity. Every condescending word from Diane, every dismissive gesture from the captain was now just data. It was fuel for the engine he was building. He thought about the name of his firm, Onyx Capital. Onyx is a stone formed from intense heat and pressure, black and hard. When polished, it reflects truth with perfect clarity. Xavier had been put under immense pressure today. Now he was ready to show Britannic Holdings Group its own reflection. As the dawn light filtered through the curtains, Xavier found himself wondering if he was going too far. Was he risking his company's reputation and resources for what amounted to personal revenge? The question lingered uncomfortably. He reached for his phone and opened his photos. There, amid business presentations and architecture shots, was a picture of his mother, Elaine Thompson, who had raised him alone in Chicago's South Side after his father died. A public school teacher who had worked 2 additional jobs to afford Yale's tuition after Xavier's scholarship covered only part of the cost. She had taught him something essential: dignity wasn't negotiable. When they try to make you small, she'd said, stand tall enough to cast a shadow they can't ignore. Xavier wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for everyone who'd ever been told subtly or explicitly that they didn't belong in spaces they had every right to occupy. By morning, Xavier had refined his approach. Over breakfast, he outlined the next steps to Olivia. We need absolute secrecy, he said, spreading jam on toast with precise movements. Only you, me, Dominic, and a small team of our most trusted analysts can know what we're doing and why. Olivia nodded, making notes on her tablet. I've already put together a list of potential team members. Gabriel Santos for financial analysis, Laura Wilson for strategic planning, Thomas Reed for market intelligence. All have been with us for at least 5 years. All have signed enhanced confidentiality agreements. Good, Xavier said. We'll need a code name for this operation. Something innocuous that won't raise flags if it appears on a calendar or in an email. Eclipse, Olivia suggested after a moment. It fits what we're doing, slowly, invisibly, covering a much larger entity until the moment of totality. Xavier smiled. Perfect. Operation Eclipse begins today. As they talked, Olivia's phone buzzed with an incoming email. She glanced down, then looked up at Xavier, her expression shifting. "What is it?" he asked. "It's from Sky Globe Airlines," she said. "Customer relations." Xavier set down his coffee cup. "Let me see." She handed him the phone. The email was addressed to Xavier, sent to his personal account that he'd used when booking the flight. "Dear Mr. Thompson, we are writing regarding your experience on Sky Globe Airlines Flight 347 on January 12th. We sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding that may have occurred. At Sky Globe, we strive to provide excellent service to all our passengers. We regret that your experience did not meet our standards. As a gesture of goodwill, we are pleased to offer you a travel voucher in the amount of $500 valid for 1 year on any Sky Globe flight. We value your business and hope to welcome you aboard again soon. Sincerely, Sky Globe Customer Relations." Xavier read it twice, then handed the phone back to Olivia. His expression hadn't changed, but something cold and hard had settled behind his eyes. $500, he said quietly. They remove me from a flight without cause, subject me to public humiliation, and they think $500 makes it right. Olivia's expression mirrored his sentiment. "It's insulting. It's illuminating," Xavier corrected. "It shows exactly how seriously they take discrimination. It's a data point and a valuable one." He took another sip of coffee. "Forward that to Dominic. It'll be useful evidence later." "Should I respond?" Olivia asked. Xavier shook his head. "No. Let them think I've accepted their token. It's better if they believe this matter is resolved." His voice took on a steely quality. "Their complacency will be their undoing." After breakfast, Xavier made a decision that surprised Olivia. "I'm going to London after all," he told her. "Not today, but tomorrow. Book me on British Airways." "Are you sure?" she asked. "The team in London can wait. The European division needs direction on the Nexus integration." "That hasn't changed," Xavier said. "And I need to maintain normal operations while we work on Eclipse. No one can suspect we're diverting resources or attention." Olivia nodded understanding. "I'll make the arrangements." As she left to coordinate with the team, Xavier stood by the window of the suite looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The city was a testament to power, to ambition, to transformation. Buildings that stood as monuments to individuals who refused to accept the world as it was. Xavier Thompson was about to add his own monument not in steel and glass, but in a complete restructuring of power. And unlike the buildings, his monument would be invisible until the moment it was complete. The dedicated Eclipse team assembled in a secured conference room at Onyx Capital's Manhattan headquarters that afternoon. The room, nicknamed the Foundry, was used for Onyx's most sensitive projects. It had enhanced security protocols, no windows, and a separate air conditioning system to prevent electronic eavesdropping. Olivia had briefed the team on the basic parameters of the project. They were exploring a potential acquisition of Britannic Holdings Group. The personal motivation behind it remained known only to her, Xavier, and Dominic. Xavier entered the room, last greeting each team member personally before taking his position at the head of the conference table. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "What we discuss in this room stays in this room. We're embarking on what may be the most ambitious acquisition in Onyx's history." He nodded to Gabriel Santos, Onyx's 41-year-old financial analysis prodigy. "Gabriel, walk us through what you found on BHG's financials." Gabriel pulled up a complex series of charts on the large display screen. At first glance, Britannic Holdings appears solid, diversified portfolio, stable revenue streams, respectable market position. But when you dig deeper, the cracks become evident. He highlighted several sections of the balance sheet. They're over-leveraged from their acquisition of Monarch Hotels last year. They took on significant debt at variable rates, which made sense when interest rates were at historic lows. But now that rates are climbing, their debt service costs are ballooning. Xavier leaned forward. Their debt covenants, are they close to any triggers? Not yet, Gabriel replied, but they're uncomfortably close to their EBITDA ratio covenant. One bad quarter could put them in violation. Thomas Reed, the market intelligence specialist, picked up the thread. Their portfolio is a mix of prestige assets and underperforming legacy businesses. Sky Globe Airlines is actually one of their better-performing assets, but their shipping division, Britannic Maritime, is hemorrhaging cash due to increased competition and rising fuel costs. Laura Wilson, the strategic planning expert, added, "The real issue is leadership. Lord Cavendish runs BHG like a family heirloom rather than a modern corporation. Decision-making is centralized, innovation is stifled, and there's significant resistance to change." Then came an unexpected voice. "I think we should consider whether this acquisition actually makes financial sense for Onyx." All eyes turned to Andrew Feldman, the 56-year-old risk management specialist known for his contrarian viewpoints. Brought into Onyx specifically to challenge groupthink, Feldman had earned Xavier's respect by being willing to voice unpopular opinions. We're talking about committing billions in capital to acquire a conglomerate with fundamental governance issues, outdated business models, and significant debt. Feldman continued, "If this were any other target, would we be having this conversation? Or are we letting other factors influence our judgment?" The room went silent. Everyone knew Feldman's job was to ask difficult questions, but this one cut close to the bone. Xavier met Feldman's gaze steadily. "It's a fair question, Andrew. Let me be clear. We will only proceed if the acquisition makes financial sense. Personal motivations may inform our target selection, but they won't override sound business judgment." He turned to the group. "That's why I need each of you to apply the same rigorous analysis you would to any potential acquisition. If the numbers don't work, we walk away." Feldman nodded, seemingly satisfied that his concerns had been acknowledged. Now Xavier continued. "Where are BHG's most vulnerable points? Where would pressure be most effective?" The team exchanged glances before Gabriel spoke up. "I think I found it. Their pension fund." He pulled up a new set of documents. BHG has a massive defined benefit pension scheme for its UK employees. Lord Cavendish, in an attempt to boost quarterly earnings, has been systematically underfunding the pension obligations for years. He's using outdated actuarial tables to justify lower contributions. "Is that legal?" Xavier asked. "Technically, yes," Dominic interjected. "But it's extremely risky. The fund is heavily invested in BHG's own stock, over 30% of the portfolio. It's a house of cards. So if BHG's stock price takes a significant hit," Xavier began. "The pension fund becomes dangerously underfunded," Olivia finished. "British pension regulators would have to step in. The scandal would be enormous." Xavier nodded slowly. "That's our lever. The point of maximum pressure." He turned to Thomas. "I need to know everything about Lord Cavendish's board. Who are his allies? Who are his potential rivals?" Thomas tapped his tablet. "I've started that analysis. Most of the board consists of Cavendish loyalists, old-school ties club memberships, that sort of thing. But there are a few independent directors who might be less enthralled with his leadership. One name keeps coming up." Thomas continued. "Victoria Harlow. She's the newest board member American, former CEO of Monarch Hotels before BHG acquired it. Word is she's frustrated with Cavendish's resistance to modernization." "She's our potential ally," Xavier said. "Find out everything about her, her management philosophy, her views on corporate governance, her schedule for the next month." The meeting continued for hours, each team member diving deep into their area of expertise. By evening, a clearer picture of Britannic Holdings Group had emerged, an empire built on prestige and tradition maintained by inertia vulnerable to disruption. As the session wrapped up, Xavier addressed the team one final time. "We have our target. We have identified its vulnerabilities. Now we begin to move. Quietly, precisely, invisibly." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "This isn't just an acquisition. This is a reckoning." After everyone had left, Xavier stayed behind with Feldman. "Thank you for speaking up earlier," he said. Feldman shrugged. "It's my job to be the devil's advocate." "And it's one you do exceptionally well," Xavier replied. "I need you to keep doing it throughout this project. If at any point you believe we're making decisions that compromise Onyx's financial interests, I expect you to say so, even if those decisions align with your personal objectives in this matter," Feldman asked pointedly. Xavier's expression remained neutral, especially then. The next morning, Xavier flew to London on British Airways. The first-class experience was flawless, which only underscored the injustice of his Sky Globe experience. This wasn't about service quality, it was about perception and prejudice. During his 3 days in London, Xavier maintained his normal schedule of meetings with Onyx's European team regarding the Nexus robotics integration. No one outside the Eclipse inner circle knew that anything unusual was happening. But each night in his suite at Claridge's, Xavier received encrypted updates from New York and worked on refining the acquisition strategy. On the third night, he convened a secure video conference with the Eclipse team. "Dominic, where do we stand on the shell company structure?" Xavier asked. "Complete," Dominic replied from the screen. "We've established 23 entities across multiple jurisdictions: Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Panama, Singapore, and the Netherlands. Each has a legitimate business purpose and clean corporate governance. The ownership trails lead through a series of trusts before eventually connecting back to Onyx, but you'd need a team of forensic accountants working for months to trace it." "Excellent," Xavier said. "Olivia, what's our acquisition timeline?" "Phase 1 silent accumulation will take approximately 3 to 4 months, she explained. "We need to move cautiously to avoid triggering disclosure requirements or causing unusual price movements. Phase 2. Destabilization will likely take 1 to 2 months. Phase 3. Alliance building will overlap with Phase 2 with Victoria Harlow as our initial target. And Phase 4, the reveal, will be timed to coincide with BHG's quarterly earnings announcement," Xavier added. "When they're already dealing with investor scrutiny, we'll drop our bombshell." Gabriel Santos joined in. "I've been analyzing their trading volumes and patterns. BHG stock typically trades about 1-2 million shares daily. If we keep our purchases under 10% of daily volume spread across multiple entities, we should be able to accumulate a significant position without attracting attention." "How much capital are we committing to this?" Laura Wilson asked. Xavier's expression was resolute. "Whatever it takes. Onyx has $4.2 billion in available investment capital, and we have credit facilities for another $7 billion. This is our priority." "What about our other investment opportunities?" Thomas asked. "We'll maintain normal operations on everything else," Xavier assured him. "This can't look like we're shifting focus or resources. But make no mistake, Eclipse is now our primary objective." As they were discussing trading strategies, Andrew Feldman raised his hand. "I have a critical concern we haven't addressed. What happens if we're discovered during the accumulation phase? If BHG realizes they're being targeted, they could implement defensive measures that would make the acquisition significantly more expensive or even impossible." Xavier nodded. "It's a legitimate risk. Dominic, what's our contingency plan?" "We have 2 approaches," Dominic replied. "First, prevention. Our shell company structure is designed to be nearly impossible to trace back to Onyx in the short term. Second, rapid response. If we detect any sign that BHG suspects a coordinated effort, we're prepared to accelerate our timetable, increase our stake to just over 5%, and file the disclosure immediately, moving directly to Phase 4. Would that work? Feldman pressed. Without the destabilization phase and alliance building, it would be suboptimal, Xavier admitted. But we'd still have the element of surprise, just not to the same degree. In that scenario, we'd conduct a more traditional, though still aggressive, proxy fight. Feldman seemed satisfied with the answer. The meeting continued with detailed discussions of trading strategies, media contacts for the destabilization phase, and preliminary approaches for Victoria Harlow. As they were wrapping up, Olivia raised a final point. Xavier, there's something symbolic about this that I think we should acknowledge. Onyx versus Britannic. Explain, Xavier said, though his slight smile suggested he already understood. Onyx, a black stone formed under pressure, able to reflect truth. Britannic, named after an old empire sustained by tradition, resistant to change. This isn't just a business acquisition, it's a clash of values and world views. Xavier nodded. That's precisely why this matters beyond the personal. It's about transforming an outdated power structure that enables and excuses discrimination. It's about creating accountability where none existed before. He looked around at the faces on the screen. When we're done, Britannic Holdings Group won't just have a new owner, it will have a new ethos. The next day, Xavier returned to New York. Operation Eclipse moved from planning to execution. Phase 1 began with subtle precision. The shell companies established by Dominic's legal team started making small irregular purchases of BHG stock through different brokers in London, Frankfurt, and Hong Kong. The trades were timed to coincide with normal market fluctuations, never large enough to cause price spikes or trigger regulatory flags. Xavier maintained his normal schedule, attending board meetings, reviewing potential investments, making public appearances at financial conferences. To the world, Onyx Capital was operating as usual, perhaps even focusing more on its recent Nexus Robotics acquisition. But in the Foundry, the Eclipse team worked with single-minded focus. 3 weeks into the accumulation phase, Gabriel brought encouraging news. We've acquired 8% of BHG's outstanding shares, he reported. Market reaction has been minimal, a slight uptick in price that analysts are attributing to general sector performance. Excellent, Xavier said. Keep the pace steady. We have time. As shares accumulated, Olivia and Thomas deepened their research into BHG's operations, governance, and vulnerabilities. The pension fund issue was confirmed as the ideal pressure point. Lord Cavendish had indeed been artificially boosting earnings by reducing pension contributions using outdated mortality tables and overly optimistic investment return assumptions to justify it. Xavier knew this was more than just a financial vulnerability. It represented a moral failure, sacrificing employee retirement security for short-term financial optics. It was the perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with Cavendish's leadership. As the silent accumulation continued, Xavier kept his eye on the ultimate objective. This wasn't just about acquiring a company or exacting revenge. It was about fundamentally transforming a culture that enabled discrimination to flourish. It was about creating lasting structural change. The name Operation Eclipse had proven apt. Like a celestial event, their strategy was unfolding with mathematical precision, invisible until the moment of totality, when darkness would suddenly fall across Lord William Cavendish's carefully preserved world. Late one night, alone in his Manhattan penthouse, Xavier stood at the window overlooking Central Park. In the reflection of the glass, he caught sight of himself poised, controlled, purposeful. But behind that calm exterior, a question lingered. Was he becoming what he despised? Was he using power just as arbitrarily as those who had wronged him? The thought troubled him enough that he reached for his phone and called the one person who had always provided moral clarity: his mother. "It's late," Elaine Thompson said when she answered. "You're working too hard again." "Just thinking," Mom Xavier replied, I wanted to hear your voice. What's on your mind, son? I'm in the middle of something big, something that started because I was treated unjustly. But now I'm wondering if my response is proportionate if I'm crossing a line." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Xavier, you've never told me much about what you do, but I know this. You've always had a strong sense of justice. Too strong sometimes. Remember when you were 12 and you organized that boycott of the corner store because Mr. Gaines followed black kids around but not white ones?" Xavier smiled at the memory. "I made picket signs out of your cardboard boxes, and you kept at it until he changed his policy. Not just for you, but for everyone. That's always been your way, turning personal injustice into broader change." She paused. "But you also need to be careful not to lose yourself in the process. Revenge burns the one who carries it as much as the one it's aimed at. This isn't just about revenge, Mom. I know, son. Just make sure whatever you're doing creates something better than what was there before. That's the test." After they hung up, Xavier continued to stare out at the night sky. Create something better. That would be his standard, not just punishing those who had wronged him, but building a system where such wrongs were less likely to occur. Transforming rather than merely destroying. With that clarity, he returned to his desk and the work of Operation Eclipse. For the next 6 months, the financial world remained oblivious to the war being waged in its shadows. Xavier Thompson operated like a ghost, his presence felt but never seen. Onyx Capital's normal activities continued providing perfect cover. They closed a deal on a financial services firm in Germany, made headlines for a successful IPO of a medical technology company, all business as usual. Meanwhile, in the foundry, Operation Eclipse proceeded with meticulous precision. The accumulation of BHG stock was a masterpiece of stealth. Dominic Parker's legal team had created a web of shell companies with innocuous names like Atlantic Ventures, Eurofund Partners, and Meridian Limited. Each purchased small, irregular blocks of BHG stock, never enough to trigger alarms. The trades were executed through different brokers across multiple financial centers. To any market analyst, it looked like a slight uptick in institutional interest, nothing more. By the end of the first quarter, they had silently acquired 4.8% of Britannic Holdings Group, hovering just below the mandatory disclosure threshold. They were a loaded gun with the safety still on. The first significant challenge came unexpectedly. During a routine check of their accumulation strategy, Gabriel Santos discovered something concerning. "We have a problem," he announced during their weekly Eclipse meeting. One of BHG's board members, Harold Winters, has a brother-in-law who works at Goldman Sachs in their risk arbitrage division. According to my source at Goldman, he's noticed an unusual pattern in BHG's trading volume and has flagged it for further analysis. The room went silent. This was exactly the kind of early detection they had hoped to avoid. "How serious is it?" Xavier asked. "Currently, it's just an analyst's observation," Gabriel replied. "But if Goldman decides to investigate further, they could potentially identify some of our shell companies' trading patterns." Dominic looked concerned. "If that happens, it could trigger BHG's defensive mechanisms before we're ready." Xavier considered the options. "We need to create a diversion," he said finally. "Something that would explain the increased trading activity but direct attention away from a potential takeover. Like what Olivia asked. A plausible alternative narrative," Xavier replied. "Thomas, contact your sources at Bloomberg. Feed them a story about potential interest in BHG's shipping division from Asian competitors. That would explain increased trading as speculation about a potential divestiture." Thomas nodded. "I can have something in the market by tomorrow." Meanwhile, Xavier continued, "We'll temporarily pause our acquisitions through the entities Goldman is tracking. Shift those resources to the Luxembourg and Cayman vehicles instead." The team executed the plan flawlessly. 2 days later, Bloomberg ran a story about rumored interest from a Singapore shipping conglomerate in Britannic Maritime. The financial news cycle picked it up. Analysts published notes on the potential value of BHG's shipping assets, and Goldman's interest in the unusual trading patterns faded, as they now had a plausible explanation. Crisis averted, the accumulation continued. Gabriel Santos's financial analysis team became corporate archaeologists, digging deeper into the fossilized remains of BHG's empire. They confirmed what Xavier had suspected: the pension fund was indeed the critical vulnerability. Lord Cavendish has been cooking the books for years, Gabriel explained during one of their secure briefings. He's been using pension fund accounting tricks to boost the company's earnings per share by as much as 15% annually, if regulators ever took a close look, or if the fund's assets took a significant hit. The house of cards collapses. Xavier finished. How exposed are they? Extremely. Gabriel replied, displaying a complex spreadsheet. The fund is officially 94% funded, according to their financial statements. But using realistic investment return assumptions and updated mortality tables, it's closer to 78% funded. That's already in the danger zone. If BHG's stock drops significantly since the fund holds so much of it, the funding ratio could plummet into territory where regulatory intervention becomes mandatory. Xavier nodded a grim satisfaction in his expression. That's our lever. Time to start pushing. Yet even as Phase 1 neared completion, Xavier was faced with an unexpected personal hurdle. During a routine medical checkup, his doctor had discovered elevated blood pressure, a condition Xavier had never experienced before. It's likely stress-related, Dr. Patel told him. Have you been under unusual pressure lately? Xavier had brushed it off, but the diagnosis lingered in his mind. Operation Eclipse was taking a toll not just professionally, but physically. The weight of orchestrating such a massive secret operation, combined with the emotional undercurrents of the motivation behind it, was affecting him more than he cared to admit. That evening, he stood in his home gym, staring at his reflection in the mirror as he completed his daily workout routine. Was this pursuit of justice worth the personal cost? Was he becoming obsessed? His phone buzzed with a news alert. Sky Globe Airlines had just won an industry award for customer service excellence. The irony was almost painful. The airline that had humiliated him was being celebrated for exactly what they had failed to provide. Xavier's resolve hardened. He increased the intensity of his workout, channeling his frustration into physical exertion. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about a system that rewarded appearance over substance, that celebrated institutions that failed in their most basic responsibilities. Phase 1 was nearly complete. It was time to move to Phase 2. Xavier made a call to a trusted contact, Michael Bennett, a veteran financial journalist at the Financial Times with a reputation for uncovering corporate malfeasance and a healthy skepticism toward the British establishment. Xavier didn't give him the whole story, just a perfectly calibrated hint. An anonymous tip delivered through secure channels. Michael, you might want to take a look at the actuarial assumptions in Britannic Holdings Group's pension fund. I hear they're still using mortality tables from the last decade and projecting returns that would make even the most aggressive hedge funds blush. That was all it took. 2 weeks later, the Financial Times published a devastating front-page exposé headlined, "Gilded Promises. Is Britannic Holdings gambling with its pensioners' future?" The article laid out in excruciating detail how Lord Cavendish's management had potentially left thousands of employees vulnerable in retirement. It questioned the governance oversight, the regulatory compliance, and the ethical implications of using pension fund accounting to boost corporate earnings. The market reacted instantly. BHG's stock, which had been relatively stable for years, dipped 5% in the first day of trading after the article. By the end of the week, it was down 9%. Panicked investors started selling. Institutional shareholders began asking uncomfortable questions. In his stately office in Mayfair, London, Lord William Cavendish was apoplectic. He was a man insulated by generations of wealth and privilege, unaccustomed to public scrutiny. He saw the article not as a financial analysis, but as a personal attack. "Who did this?" he bellowed at his board of directors in an emergency meeting. "This is a smear campaign. Find the source." His board, a collection of aging loyalists and a few quietly resentful executives, offered platitudes and promises of an internal review. But the damage was done. Doubt had been introduced into the system. The destabilization had only begun. Over the next few weeks, a series of seemingly unrelated financial analyses appeared across multiple outlets, each focusing on a different aspect of Britannic Holdings' vulnerabilities. The Wall Street Journal questioned the strategic rationale behind BHG's acquisition of Monarch Hotels, suggesting the company had vastly overpaid. Bloomberg published an analysis of Britannic Maritime's declining market share in the face of more efficient Asian competitors. Reuters examined the aging fleet of Sky Globe Airlines, raising concerns about upcoming capital expenditure requirements. None of these stories were factually incorrect. They were simply bringing to light the uncomfortable truths that Lord Cavendish had been able to obscure behind BHG's prestigious facade. And while they appeared to be coming from different sources, each was the result of careful information provided by Thomas Reed's market intelligence team. The cumulative effect was devastating. BHG's stock continued its downward trajectory, dropping another 7% over 3 weeks. Credit rating agencies put the company on watch for a potential downgrade. Institutional investors began demanding meetings with management. Just as the destabilization strategy was gaining momentum, a serious complication arose. The UK's Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, announced it was launching an investigation into potential market manipulation of BHG's stock. "This is bad," Dominic warned during an emergency eclipse meeting. "If the FCA starts examining trading patterns, they might identify our accumulation strategy." "How likely is that?" Xavier asked. "Given our precautions, not very," Dominic replied. "But it adds a layer of risk we didn't anticipate. They'll have regulatory powers to demand information from brokers that could eventually lead back to us." Andrew Feldman, ever the voice of caution, spoke up. "Maybe we should consider pausing the operation, at least until the investigation concludes." Xavier shook his head. "That would cost us months, maybe the entire opportunity. The FCA investigation is likely just Cavendish pulling strings to try to stop the bleeding." He turned to Dominic. "Can we accelerate the timeline instead? Move faster while they're still setting up their investigation?" "It's risky," Dominic admitted, "but possible. We could increase our purchasing through the Singapore and Luxembourg vehicles. They're the most insulated from regulatory scrutiny." "Do it," Xavier decided. "And Thomas, we need a counter-narrative. Get your contacts at Bloomberg to publish a story suggesting the FCA investigation is politically agreed, but the exchange left a palpable tension in the room. Operation Eclipse was crossing new lines, and not everyone was comfortable with the direction. The next challenge came from an unexpected quarter. As BHG's stock declined, several UK pension funds that held significant positions began publicly defending the company. They issued statements expressing confidence in management and questioning the recent negative press. "This doesn't make sense," Olivia said, reviewing the statements. "These funds should be concerned about BHG's pension accounting, not defending it." "Unless they're compromised," Xavier suggested. "Thomas, dig into these pension funds. Find out if there are any connections to Cavendish or his circle." The investigation revealed that 2 of the pension fund managers were former classmates of Cavendish's from Oxford, and another had a daughter who worked at a charity where Lady Cavendish was a patron. "The old boy network," Xavier said with disgust. "This is exactly the kind of entrenched power structure we're trying to dismantle." Despite these complications, the destabilization phase was achieving its objectives. BHG's stock continued its decline, reaching a 5-year low. The company's credit rating was downgraded, increasing its borrowing costs. And Lord Cavendish's response only made matters worse. Rather than addressing the substantive issues, he dismissed the criticism as uninformed speculation and suggested that continental jealousy of British success was behind the negative press. His pompous, tone-deaf comments provided perfect fodder for social media mockery. Inside BHG's headquarters, panic was setting in. Board members were receiving calls from worried shareholders. Executive committee meetings became tense affairs filled with blame and recrimination. The corporate culture, long characterized by deference to tradition and hierarchy, was fracturing under pressure. This was precisely what Xavier had intended. Destabilization wasn't just about driving down the stock price. It was about creating the conditions for transformation. Systems under pressure reveal their flaws. People under pressure reveal their true characters. While BHG was in turmoil, Xavier's shell companies continued their steady accumulation. By the end of the destabilization phase, Onyx entities owned 17% of Britannic Holdings Group. They were now unquestionably the largest single shareholder, though the company remained unaware of who was buying its shares or why. The time had come to find an inside ally, someone who could provide intelligence and influence from within the board itself. Victoria Harlow was the perfect candidate. Xavier flew to Geneva, where Victoria Harlow was scheduled to speak at the Women in Global Leadership Conference. He didn't send an intermediary. He went himself. This part of the strategy required personal touch. At 43, Victoria Harlow was a rarity in the upper echelons of international business, an American woman who had risen to become CEO of Monarch Hotels through merit rather than family connections or board politics. When BHG acquired Monarch, she had negotiated a position on the parent company's board as part of the deal. By all accounts, her experience on the BHG board had been frustrating. Her suggestions for modernization were routinely dismissed. Her expertise was acknowledged but not utilized. She was, as Thomas Reed had discovered through his network, considering resigning at the end of her initial term. Xavier approached her after her keynote address during the reception that followed. The room was filled with corporate executives and aspiring leaders, a perfect environment for what would appear to be a chance encounter between peers. "Ms. Harlow," he said, extending his hand. "Xavier Thompson, founder of Onyx Capital Partners. Your speech on adaptive leadership was excellent." Victoria recognized the name immediately. Onyx Capital was a major player in global finance. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Mr. Thompson," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm surprised to see you here. I wasn't aware you had a particular interest in gender equity in leadership." "I have an interest in effective leadership regardless of gender," Xavier replied smoothly. "Something I believe is sorely lacking at Britannic Holdings Group." Her professional mask remained perfect, but he saw a flicker of agreement in her eyes. "Lord Cavendish is traditional in his approach," she said carefully, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "He's a relic," Xavier stated bluntly, dispensing with pleasantries. "He's running a 21st-century global corporation like a 19th-century feudal estate." "The pension fund scandal is just the tip of the iceberg. The company is rotting from the head." He paused, letting his next words land with maximum impact. "My firm has acquired a 17% stake in BHG. We are preparing a proxy fight to replace the board and install new leadership. Leadership that will modernize the company, unlock its true value, and protect its employees and shareholders. I believe you are a part of that future. Lord Cavendish is not." Victoria was stunned into silence. She stared at him, processing the sheer audacity of his move. A 17% stake acquired in secret. This wasn't just a corporate raider. This was a grandmaster playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because you see what I see," Xavier said. "A bloated, mismanaged company ripe for a turnaround. And because when we make our move, I want you on our side. You know the company's weaknesses from the inside. With your support, this can be a swift surgical transition instead of a long, bloody war." Victoria studied him carefully. "This isn't just business for you, is it? There's something personal here." Xavier hadn't expected such perception. He maintained his composure, but Victoria had touched a nerve. "What makes you say that?" he asked. "I've met many corporate raiders, Mr. Thompson. They're calculating, dispassionate. You have an intensity that suggests this means more to you than just a profitable acquisition." Xavier considered denying it, but instinct told him honesty, or at least partial honesty, would serve him better. "I had an illuminating experience with Sky Globe Airlines recently," he admitted. "It revealed serious cultural issues that I believe stem from BHG's leadership. Let's just say I've seen firsthand how Cavendish's outdated worldview trickles down to customer experience." Victoria nodded slowly. "I understand. More than you might think." She glanced around the reception. "This isn't the place for this conversation. I'm staying at the Beau Rivage. Perhaps we could continue this discussion privately at the hotel bar at 9. Xavier nodded. "I'll be there." That evening, in the elegant, discreet setting of the hotel's bar, Victoria shared her own frustrations with BHG's leadership. "When Monarch was acquired, I was promised autonomy and influence. Neither materialized," she explained, swirling her gin and tonic. "Instead, I found myself in a boardroom full of men who view me as a token, a box checked for diversity, but not a voice to be heard. Cavendish tolerates me, but barely. I've brought forward proposals for digital transformation, sustainability initiatives, workplace modernization, all ignored or indefinitely tabled for further discussion." Her expression hardened. "But what truly disgusted me was discovering how they've been manipulating the pension fund. My father was a union machinist for 40 years. His pension was his security, his reward for a lifetime of work. To see Cavendish gambling with the retirements of thousands of employees for short-term earnings manipulation." She shook her head. "It's not just poor governance. It's immoral." Xavier listened intently, recognizing a potential ally whose motivation went beyond career advancement or financial gain. Victoria had principles, a moral compass that aligned with his own. "What would you need from me to support your takeover bid?" she finally asked. "Intelligence, initially," Xavier replied. "Board dynamics, potential allies, Cavendish's vulnerabilities. Then when we go public with our position, your public support and vote." Victoria considered this. "I can provide those things, but I want assurances about your plans post-acquisition. What happens to the employees? The pension fund, the company's heritage brands." "The pension fund will be fully funded within 1 year," Xavier promised. "No mass layoffs, structural inefficiencies will be addressed through attrition and voluntary separation packages. As for the heritage brands, they'll be preserved but modernized. BHG has valuable assets. They're just poorly managed." "And what role would you see for me in this new structure?" she asked directly. "Initially," lead independent director Xavier said, "potentially CEO if that's a role you'd consider. Your experience with Monarch gives you invaluable insight into BHG's hospitality division." Victoria nodded slowly. "I'd need these commitments in writing." "You'll have them," Xavier assured her. "But our conversation never happened. Until we file our disclosure, absolute secrecy is essential." "Understood." She finished her drink and stood to leave. "One final question, Mr. Thompson. What happens to Cavendish?" Xavier's expression remained neutral. "He loses his chairmanship, his influence, and the company that's been in his family for generations. Justice doesn't have to be vindictive to be effective." Victoria seemed to approve of this answer. "I'll be in touch through secure channels. Good night, Mr. Thompson." As she walked away, Xavier felt a surge of confidence. Operation Eclipse had just gained a powerful inside ally. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., Richard Montgomery, the CEO of Sky Globe Airlines, had handled the Xavier Thompson incident with textbook corporate indifference. He had received a detailed complaint letter from Xavier's personal lawyer, not Onyx's counsel outlining the events on Flight 347. Montgomery had passed it to his PR department, who drafted a standard response. They offered Mr. Thompson a $500 travel voucher and a written apology for the misunderstanding. Montgomery signed it without a second thought, seeing it as a minor customer service issue now resolved. He was far more concerned about Britannic Holdings Group's stock price, which was inexplicably tanking. As a subsidiary CEO, Montgomery reported directly to Lord Cavendish, and those calls had become increasingly tense over the past month. "What the hell is going on with your airline's costs?" Richard Cavendish had demanded in their most recent call. "We need every division performing at maximum efficiency right now. The vultures are circling." Montgomery had assured him that cost-cutting measures were being implemented, including reducing staffing on less profitable routes and deferring non-essential maintenance. What he didn't mention was that these measures were further eroding Sky Globe's already declining customer satisfaction metrics. Captain James Holloway was still flying the lucrative New York-London route. He had filed his report backing Diane Foster's version of events completely. He'd barely given the incident another thought. He was a company man, and he had followed procedure. And Diane Foster, the flight attendant, felt vindicated. She had in her mind protected her aircraft from a problematic passenger. She boasted to her colleagues about how she had stood her ground. She had no idea that her small act of prejudice had set in motion a financial avalanche that was about to bury Britannic Holdings Group, Sky Globe Airlines, and everyone associated with them. She was a single match unaware she had been dropped in a forest drenched in gasoline. The 3 weeks following Xavier's meeting with Victoria Harlow passed quickly. In that time, 2 critical developments occurred. First, Victoria contacted Xavier through a secure channel he had provided. After careful consideration, she had decided to support his takeover bid. She saw the future Xavier was offering a revitalized modern company and compared it to the stagnant, crony-filled present under Lord Cavendish. The choice became clear. She provided invaluable intelligence about the board's dynamics, identifying which members might be persuadable and which were unwaveringly loyal to Cavendish. She also confirmed that the pension fund issue was even more serious than they had discovered through public documents. Second, Onyx's shell companies continued their steady accumulation of BHG stock. By the time they were ready for the reveal, they controlled 23% of the company's outstanding shares. But there was also a serious complication. A week before their planned disclosure, Olivia discovered a potential leak. "One of our traders at Morgan Stanley has been approached by a British journalist," she told Xavier during an urgent call. "The reporter is asking questions about unusual trading patterns in BHG stock. He seems to have connected some dots." "How much does he know?" Xavier asked. "Nothing concrete yet, just fishing. But he mentioned 2 of our shell companies by name." This was a critical moment. If their accumulation strategy was exposed prematurely, BHG could implement defensive measures that would make the takeover significantly more expensive or even impossible. "We need to accelerate," Xavier decided. "Move up the disclosure to tomorrow morning. Contact our PR team and legal counsel. We're going to Phase 4 immediately." "That's a full week early," Olivia cautioned. "We were planning to reach 25%. 23% is enough," Xavier replied. "Better to move on our terms than be forced to react to a news story." The stage was set. The ghost was about to appear. On a Tuesday morning at precisely 8:30 a.m. London time, Dominic Parker filed the Schedule 13D disclosure with the SEC. Simultaneously, similar filings were submitted to the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. Press releases were sent to every major financial news outlet in the world. The headline was cataclysmic. Onyx Capital, led by U.S. Bill Onyx. Capital, led by U.S. billionaire Xavier Thompson, reveals 23%. Stake in Britannic Holdings Group launches. Proxy battle to oust Chairman Lord Cavendish. The financial world exploded. BHG stock surged 12% on the news of a potential takeover. Trading volume hit an all-time high as speculators rushed to position themselves for what promised to be a dramatic corporate battle. In his Mayfair office, Lord William Cavendish stared at the headline on his computer screen, his face turning a shade of pale white. Onyx Capital, Xavier Thompson. The names meant nothing to him. He was a British lord. He didn't track the dealings of American financiers. But the 23% stake was terrifying. Someone had acquired nearly a quarter of his company without his knowledge. Meanwhile, in the New York headquarters of SkyGlobe Airlines, CEO Richard Montgomery saw the name and felt a sudden cold dread creep up his spine. Xavier Thompson. He scrambled for his files, pulling up the complaint from 6 months ago. The man his airline had kicked off a flight for being problematic. He stared at the signed apology letter and the pathetic $500 voucher offer. It wasn't a customer service issue. It was a declaration of war. And he had tried to solve it with a travel coupon. The news of Onyx Capital's stake hit Britannic Holdings Group like a lightning strike. The world that Lord William Cavendish had so carefully curated one of polite board meetings, club lunches, and inherited deference was shattered overnight. The company was now the battleground for one of the most aggressive proxy fights the London Stock Exchange had seen in decades. Cavendish and his loyalists immediately went on the defensive. They hired a team of high-priced lawyers and PR consultants from the firm Brunswick. They began painting Xavier Thompson in the press as a ruthless American corporate raider, an asset stripper who would carve up their beloved British institution and sell it for parts. They played the nationalist card warning that a cherished piece of the UK's corporate heritage was under attack from a foreign predator. The immediate countermeasures were swift and aggressive. BHG's board approved a poison pill defense, a shareholder rights plan designed to make a takeover prohibitively expensive if any investor crossed a 25% ownership threshold. They scheduled an extraordinary general meeting to vote on additional anti-takeover provisions. Xavier had anticipated these defensive moves. The poison pill didn't worry him. His 23% stake was already sufficient to wage an effective proxy fight without triggering the threshold. The real battle would be fought in the court of investor opinion. Cavendish was betting that national pride and tradition would sway British institutional investors to his side. Xavier was counting on the cold, hard math of financial performance to persuade them otherwise. Lord Cavendish agreed to a television interview on the BBC, a move his advisers warned against. He saw it as an opportunity to project strength and tradition. It was a disaster. Seated in a gilded armchair, looking every bit the out-of-touch aristocrat, Cavendish was asked about Xavier Thompson's critique of his leadership. "This Mr. Thompson, he comes from a different world," Cavendish said with a condescending sniff. "A world of short-term gains and brutish tactics. We at Britannic Holdings believe in stewardship, in legacy. This isn't just about numbers on a page. It's about a certain quality, a certain standard he simply wouldn't understand." The interviewer pressed him. "Mr. Thompson's firm Onyx Capital has one of the best track records for turning around companies and increasing shareholder value over the long term. Your own company's stock has been flat for 7 years. Isn't that the real issue?" "Shareholder value is one metric," Cavendish retorted, growing flustered. "But there is also heritage. There is a proper way of doing things. This man, his kind of money is loud." The interview was a gift to Xavier's camp. Loud money. Wouldn't understand. The coded language was clear to anyone paying attention. It wasn't just a defense of his company. It was a defense of his class, his world, against an outsider. James Hargreaves of The Guardian, the journalist who had almost uncovered Onyx's strategy, prematurely published a scathing analysis titled "The Aristocrats' Last Stand Class and Race in Britain's Boardrooms." The article dissected the thinly veiled prejudice in Cavendish's comments and the broader implications for corporate Britain's resistance to diversity. Just as the public relations battle was intensifying, Xavier faced a potential internal crisis. Andrew Feldman requested a private meeting. "I need to speak frankly," Xavier Feldman began once they were alone in Xavier's office. "The pension fund issue we've been highlighting? It's worse than we thought. How much worse? Xavier asked. If we push too hard on this point, if regulators intervene aggressively, the fund could collapse. Thousands of retirees could see their benefits cut. Xavier's expression darkened. That's not acceptable. I know, Feldman agreed. But here's my concern. Are we creating this crisis by targeting the pension fund? Vulnerability to destabilize BHG. Are we putting innocent retirees at risk for our strategic objectives? It was a sobering question, one that forced Xavier to confront the potential collateral damage of Operation Eclipse. This wasn't just about punishing those who had wronged him. It could affect thousands of innocent people. You're right to raise this, Xavier said after a long pause. We need to adjust our strategy. Draft a public statement committing to fully fund the pension immediately after gaining control, and prepare a contingency plan to stabilize the fund even if our takeover bid fails. Feldman seemed relieved. I'll get on it right away. This exchange highlighted a growing tension in Xavier's approach. The line between justice and vengeance, between reform and destruction, was becoming increasingly blurred. He needed to ensure that his pursuit of accountability didn't harm the very people he claimed to be protecting. Xavier, by contrast to Cavendish's emotional appeals, remained almost entirely silent in the media. He refused all interview requests. His only communication was a meticulously crafted letter sent to every BHG shareholder. It was a masterpiece of corporate strategy written in cool, dispassionate language. It laid out with surgical precision the financial case for change. The letter, titled A Pathway to Renewed Value, detailed years of underperformance under Lord Cavendish. It highlighted the pension fund scandal, the bloated management structure, and the portfolio of underperforming assets. It then presented Xavier's plan to streamline operations, sell off non-core assets, like the struggling shipping line, reinvest heavily in the profitable core businesses like the hotel chain and Sky Globe Airlines, and install a new board of directors composed of industry experts, not Cavendish's old-school chums. The letter named Victoria Harlow as his proposed new lead independent director. The effect was profound. Pension funds, institutional investors, and hedge funds, the entities that actually owned most of BHG, were not swayed by Cavendish's appeals to heritage. They were swayed by Xavier's promise of a higher stock price and better returns. The battle was no longer about class or nationality. It was about competence versus incompetence. The final showdown was set for an extraordinary general meeting, a special shareholder meeting called for the purpose of the vote. It was to be held in a grand ballroom at the Savoy Hotel in London, a place that reeked of the very old-world establishment Xavier was seeking to dismantle. Dominic Parker filed additional regulatory documents officially nominating a new slate of directors to replace the existing board. The business press was filled with daily updates on the takeover battle. Financial analysts published competing assessments of the two leadership visions. The story had everything: wealth, power, tradition versus innovation, an upstart challenging the establishment. 3 days before the meeting, Xavier received an unexpected call from James Hargreaves, the Guardian journalist. Mr. Thompson Hargreaves began, "I've been doing some digging, and I've come across an interesting connection. 6 months ago, you were removed from a Sky Globe flight in what witnesses describe as a racially charged incident. Now you're attempting to take over Sky Globe's parent company. Is there a link Xavier had prepared for this possibility?" "Mr. Hargreaves, I appreciate your thoroughness. It's true that I had an unpleasant experience with Sky Globe, as have many customers. That experience certainly gave me insights into their operational issues. But Onyx Capital makes acquisition decisions based on financial metrics and transformation potential, not personal grievances. So, you deny that this takeover is motivated by revenge?" Hargreaves pressed. "Revenge is emotional and irrational," Xavier replied calmly. "Onyx Capital is a professional investment firm. We're motivated by creating value for our investors and for the companies we acquire. If you look at our track record, you'll see a consistent pattern of identifying undervalued assets and unlocking their potential through better governance and strategic focus. And yet, the timing is remarkable. Hargreaves persisted. Coincidental, but ultimately irrelevant, Xavier countered. Judge our bid on its merits. Lord Cavendish has delivered 7 years of stagnation. We're offering a concrete plan for growth. That's what shareholders care about, and that's what should matter in your reporting. After the call, Xavier sat in silence, contemplating the conversation. The journalist had come dangerously close to uncovering the personal motivation behind Operation Eclipse. If that narrative took hold in the media, it could undermine the takeover bid, making it seem petty and vindictive, rather than strategic and value-creating. Yet there was also a part of him that wanted the truth to be known, that wanted Diane Foster, Captain Holloway, and Richard Montgomery to realize that their actions had consequences, that power didn't protect them from accountability. In the end, he decided to stay the course. The takeover wasn't just about them anymore. It was about transforming an entire corporate culture, about creating a more equitable and efficient business. The personal motivation had been the catalyst, but the mission had evolved into something larger. What no one outside of Xavier's inner circle knew was the personal motivation behind it all. The connection to that fateful day on Sky Globe Flight 347 remained hidden. For now. Lord William Cavendish did not surrender easily. Over the 6 weeks leading up to the extraordinary general meeting, he launched a full-scale defense against Xavier's takeover attempt. His PR team crafted a narrative painting Xavier as a heartless corporate raider interested only in short-term profits. They highlighted Britannic's 116-year history, its role in British commerce, and its long-standing relationships with employees, customers, and communities. Cavendish himself embarked on a roadshow meeting with major institutional shareholders to plead his case personally. He leveraged his connections in British society. Fellow aristocrats who sat on the boards of pension funds and insurance companies, old university friends and banking members of his clubs who managed family offices. The strategy had mixed results. Some traditional British institutions pledged their support swayed by personal relationships and appeals to national pride. But many international investors and more progressive British funds remained skeptical, focused on the company's financial performance rather than its heritage. A significant obstacle emerged when the UK government, pressured by labor unions concerned about potential job losses under American ownership, announced it would review the takeover on national security grounds. British law allowed such reviews for acquisitions in sectors deemed strategic, and Britannic Maritime's shipping contracts with the Royal Navy provided the necessary pretext. This was a serious threat that could delay or even block the takeover. Xavier called an emergency meeting of the Eclipse team. "This is Cavendish pulling political strings," Xavier stated. "We need to neutralize this quickly." How, Olivia asked. "Government reviews can take months." "We changed the narrative," Xavier replied. "Thomas, contact your sources in the British labor press. Feed them data on BHG's pension underfunding and how it affects union workers. Make it clear that the current management is putting workers' retirements at risk. Meanwhile, we'll issue a public commitment to maintain all UK jobs for at least 3 years post-acquisition. We'll emphasize our plans to increase investment in British operations, not reduce it." The counteroffensive worked. Within days, several major unions shifted from opposition to neutrality, some even suggesting that new ownership might be better for workers than the status quo. The government, sensing the changing political winds, quietly downgraded its review to a routine process that wouldn't impede the shareholder vote. Cavendish's team attempted to find dirt on Xavier, hiring private investigators to dig into his past. They found nothing compromising. No scandals, no failures, no skeletons in his closet. Xavier Thompson's record was impeccable, which only increased Cavendish's frustration and sense of persecution. In a last-ditch effort, Cavendish attempted to implement a poison pill defense, a shareholder rights plan designed to make a takeover prohibitively expensive. But the company's articles of association required board approval for such a measure, and Victoria Harlow, along with two other independent directors now quietly aligned with Xavier, blocked the move. The most dangerous moment came 3 days before the vote, when Cavendish announced he had secured a white knight, a friendly alternative buyer in the form of a consortium led by the Chinese State Investment Fund. The consortium offered a 15% premium over the current market price, which had already been elevated by Xavier's takeover bid. The news sent BHG's stocks surging another 10%. Financial analysts began questioning whether Onyx could or would match the offer. Xavier called an emergency strategy session. "This is a desperate move," he told the team. A Chinese state-backed acquisition would face months, maybe years, of regulatory scrutiny in both the UK and US. It's not a serious alternative. It's a delay tactic. "But the market's taking it seriously," Olivia pointed out. "The share price jump makes our acquisition much more expensive." Xavier nodded. "We need to undermine the credibility of this offer without appearing xenophobic or nationalistic. That would make us no better than Cavendish." After hours of discussion, they settled on a two-pronged strategy. First, they would raise their own implied valuation by announcing a post-acquisition investment plan of $2 billion in BHG's core businesses over 5 years. Second, they would publicly question the regulatory viability of the Chinese bid, focusing on national security concerns that had previously blocked similar acquisitions in Western countries. The counter-strategy was effective. By the following day, several influential shareholders had publicly expressed skepticism about the Chinese consortium's offer, citing regulatory uncertainty and timeline concerns. The White Knight gambit was faltering. As the meeting date approached, proxy advisory firms, ISS and Glass Lewis, both recommended shareholders vote for Xavier's slate of directors, citing years of underperformance under Cavendish's leadership and the compelling turnaround plan presented by Onyx Capital. The tide was turning against the old guard. Throughout this period, Xavier maintained his disciplined silence. He gave no interviews, made no public appearances related to the takeover bid, and allowed his written materials and proxy filings to speak for him. His restraint was strategic. Every time Lord Cavendish spoke, he reinforced the image of an out-of-touch aristocrat desperately clinging to power. Every time Cavendish invoked tradition over performance, he alienated another institutional investor. Xavier understood that sometimes the most devastating weapon was allowing your opponent to defeat himself. 3 days before the meeting, the Financial Times published a detailed comparison of the two leaders. The article contrasted Cavendish, born into wealth, educated at Eton and Oxford, inheriting his position with Xavier Thompson, raised by a single mother in Chicago scholarship to Yale self-made billionaire. The piece didn't explicitly mention race, but the photographs side by side told a story of old power versus new, of inherited privilege versus earned achievement. On the eve of the meeting, proxy vote tallies showed Xavier's slate leading by a narrow margin. The outcome would likely be determined by a few large institutional investors who had not yet declared their positions. That night, Xavier stayed in his suite at Claridge's reviewing his speech one final time. Olivia and Dominic were with him, running through potential scenarios and last-minute strategies. The latest projections show us winning with about 58% of the vote, Olivia reported. But that assumes no surprises tomorrow. Xavier nodded. Cavendish will have something prepared. A last emotional appeal, perhaps some announcement designed to sway undecided voters. "Are you concerned?" Dominic asked. Xavier looked up from his notes. "No, because our case isn't emotional. It's factual, it's mathematical, it's historical. 7 years of underperformance versus our track record of creating value. That's the battle, and it's already been fought in the numbers." Olivia watched him carefully. "You seem very calm for someone about to engage in the biggest takeover battle of his career." Xavier smiled slightly. This was never about the size of the deal. It was about principle, about consequences, about creating change that matters. He set down his notes. Tomorrow we transform not just a company, but a culture. The Savoy's grand ballroom was packed to capacity. Shareholders, lawyers, investment bankers, and journalists filled every seat. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. This was financial theater at its most dramatic, a public contest for control of a $22 billion empire. Lord William Cavendish and his board sat on one side of the stage looking grim, their expressions a mixture of defiance and apprehension. On the other side sat Xavier Thompson, Olivia Ramirez, and Dominic Parker. Xavier was dressed in his usual style, impeccable tailoring that commanded respect without ostentation. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Cavendish's visible agitation. The chairman of the meeting, a senior partner from a London law firm serving as independent adjudicator, called the extraordinary general meeting to order. He explained the voting procedure and introduced the two competing slates of directors. Lord Cavendish spoke first. He rose slowly, tugging at his bespoke suit jacket as he approached the podium. At 68, he still cut an impressive figure. Tall, aristocratic features, a full head of silver hair. His voice carried the distinctive cadence of Britain's elite educational institutions. Esteemed shareholders, distinguished guests, he began. For 116 years, Britannic Holdings Group has stood as a pillar of British commerce and a symbol of our nation's enterprise. For 3 generations, my family has had the privilege of guiding this great company through wars, recessions, and transformative technologies. His speech was emotional and deeply personal, emphasizing his family's legacy, the company's traditions, and what he characterized as the threat of short-term American financial engineering posed by Onyx Capital. This company is not merely a collection of assets to be stripped and sold, he declared, his voice rising. It is a living institution with responsibilities to its employees, its pensioners, its customers, and indeed to Britain itself. I implore you, do not sacrifice a century of tradition on the altar of quarterly returns. As Cavendish continued, an unexpected development occurred. A group of BHG pensioners organized by Cavendish's team entered the ballroom carrying signs protesting the takeover. "Save our pensions and hands off our company," the signs read. It was a calculated move to create dramatic visuals for the evening news. The pensioners' presence created a momentary stir, but the meeting chairman quickly restored order, allowing Cavendish to continue. He concluded with a passionate plea for continuity and heritage. As Cavendish returned to his seat, there was polite applause, notably stronger from the British contingent in the room. He had made his case as well as he could, appealing to emotion, to heritage, to nationalism. But there was an unmistakable defensiveness to his argument, a plea to preserve the status quo rather than embrace the future. Now it was Xavier Thompson's turn. He walked to the podium, unhurried, his movements economical and precise. The room fell silent, all eyes on this man who had emerged seemingly from nowhere to challenge one of Britain's corporate aristocrats. For a moment Xavier stood in silence, his gaze sweeping across the room, making eye contact with the major institutional investors in the front rows. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear and measured, carrying easily without seeming forceful. "Good morning," he began. "Lord Cavendish speaks of history. I am here to speak about the future." He didn't use slides or a teleprompter. He spoke from memory, from conviction. For the past decade, Britannic Holdings Group has not been a leader. It has been a museum, a monument to a bygone era managed by sentiment instead of strategy. It has undervalued its assets, ignored its liabilities, and worst of all, it has failed you, its owners. He addressed the pension fund scandal directly. The leadership of this company gambled with the retirement funds of its own loyal employees, prioritizing optics over obligations. That is not stewardship. That is a profound moral and fiduciary failure. Then, directly addressing the pensioners who had been brought in to protest, "To the BHG pensioners here today, I understand your concerns. Change is always uncertain, But let me be absolutely clear. If our slate of directors is elected, our first action will be to fully fund the pension plan within 12 months. Your retirement security is not negotiable. It is a sacred obligation that the current leadership has neglected. This unexpected commitment seemed to take the wind out of the protest's sails. Several of the pensioners exchanged confused glances, clearly not having expected their concerns to be addressed so directly and substantively. Xavier then laid out his vision, a leaner, more agile, more profitable BHG. He spoke of innovation, accountability, and growth. He wasn't the bogeyman Cavendish had painted. He sounded like exactly what he was, a brilliant, disciplined, and incredibly successful businessman. This is not about destroying a legacy, Xavier concluded. It is about building a new one. A legacy of excellence, of integrity, and of value. A legacy where the only thing that matters is performance, and where everyone from the boardroom to the jet bridge is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room once more. The choice before you is simple. Do you want to remain in the museum, or do you want to step into the future? With that, he returned to his seat. The room was silent for a beat, and then a ripple of applause started growing into a steady ovation, primarily from the section where the professional investors sat. The chairman called for the vote, though most shareholders had already submitted their proxies in advance. It was largely a formality. 2 hours later, after all ballots had been counted and verified, the results were announced. Xavier Thompson's proposed slate of directors was approved with 64% of the vote. Lord William Cavendish was officially removed as chairman of the board of Britannic Holdings Group. The king was dead. As the meeting adjourned and chaos erupted, journalists rushing for the exits, lawyers huddling with clients, shareholders discussing the implications, Xavier walked calmly across the stage to where a stunned and ashen-faced Lord Cavendish stood, surrounded by equally shell-shocked advisors. Lord Cavendish Xavier said, his voice quiet enough that only the two of them could hear. A piece of advice. When you find yourself in a position of power, it is wise to be gracious to those you perceive as beneath you. You never know who you will meet on your way down. Cavendish stared at him, his mind still reeling, unable to process the totality of his defeat. "Who?" he stammered. "Who are you? Really?" Xavier allowed himself a small, cold smile. "I'm just a passenger, someone your airline felt was problematic." The flicker of recognition in Cavendish's eyes was Xavier's first true taste of victory. He turned and walked off the stage, leaving the old lord to the ruins of his empire. Xavier's next stop was not a celebration. He, Olivia, and Dominic went straight to a temporary office they had set up nearby. The first order of business was to call an emergency meeting of the new board. The first motion proposed by Xavier and seconded by Victoria Harlow was unanimous. Xavier Thompson was elected the new chairman of Britannic Holdings Group. His second act as chairman was a phone call. He had the number routed to the office of Richard Montgomery, the CEO of Sky Globe Airlines. Montgomery, who had been watching the events unfold with a sense of sickening dread, answered on the first ring. Richard Montgomery speaking. Mr. Montgomery, Xavier's voice was cool and unfamiliar. "This is Xavier Thompson, your new boss." There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. "I've just reviewed the performance of Sky Globe Airlines." Xavier continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Frankly, it's abysmal. Your customer satisfaction ratings are dropping. Your margins are thin, and your leadership seems to have a fatal blind spot when it comes to basic human decency. As my first official act concerning Sky Globe, I am accepting your immediate resignation." "But, Mr. Thompson, we can talk about this," Montgomery pleaded, his career flashing before his eyes. "We have nothing to talk about," Xavier said. "The time for talking was 6 months ago when you dismissed a valid complaint of discrimination with a $500 voucher. You should have taken the meeting. Clear out your desk. A representative from my transition team will be there by the end of the day to escort you out." He hung up the phone. Xavier felt no joy, only a grim sense of cosmic rebalancing. He looked at Olivia. "Get me the flight manifests for Sky Globe Flight 347 from JFK to Heathrow for the last 6 months. I'm looking for Captain James Holloway and a senior flight attendant named Diane Foster. It's time for some performance reviews." As Xavier was about to continue outlining his immediate priorities, Andrew Feldman knocked on the door. His expression was serious. "I need a moment, Xavier." "Can it wait?" Xavier asked. "We're in the middle of transition planning. It's about the performance reviews you just mentioned. I think you should hear this now." Xavier excused himself and stepped into an adjoining room with Feldman. "I've been looking into Diane Foster's personnel file," Feldman began. "There's something you should know. She's a single mother with 3 children, one of whom has a serious medical condition requiring ongoing treatment. Her Sky Globe health insurance is crucial for this care." Xavier's expression remained neutral. "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't excuse discriminatory behavior." "No, it doesn't." Feldman agreed. "But I think we need to consider the collateral damage of summary termination. The child's treatment would be interrupted, potentially with serious consequences." Xavier was silent for a long moment. This was the kind of complexity he hadn't anticipated the human cost of his pursuit of justice. "What are you suggesting?" he finally asked. "A more measured approach," Feldman replied. "Termination with 6 months of continued health benefits, enough time for her to find alternative insurance. It serves justice without harming an innocent child." Xavier nodded slowly. "You're right. Make the arrangements. And Feldman, thank you for bringing this to my attention." This exchange revealed a growing evolution in Xavier's thinking. The righteous anger that had fueled Operation Eclipse was being tempered by a deeper understanding of responsibility. True power wasn't just the ability to punish, it was the wisdom to know when and how to show mercy. The aftermath of the takeover was swift and precise, a corporate restructuring that was also a meticulous delivery of accountability. Xavier Thompson was not a bombastic leader. He didn't issue furious press releases or conduct vengeful purges for show. His retribution was quiet, structural, and devastatingly effective. Lord William Cavendish was ruined in a way that new money could never be. He didn't just lose his job, he lost his identity. The chairmanship of BHG was the bedrock of his social standing, the source of his power and influence in the aristocratic circles of Britain. Without it, he was just a man with a title and a dwindling fortune. Xavier's new board launched a full audit of the company's finances, which uncovered years of Cavendish's profligate spending on the corporate account, hunting lodges, private jets for personal use, consulting fees for his friends from university. The new board presented him with a choice: quietly repay the millions or face a public lawsuit. He was forced to sell his ancestral estate in the Cotswolds and his London townhouse to cover the debt. He became a recluse, his name a cautionary tale whispered at the clubs he could no longer afford to frequent. He had looked down on Xavier's loud money only to be silenced by his own quiet disgrace. Richard Montgomery, the former CEO of Sky Globe Airlines, became a pariah in the aviation industry. Being fired by Xavier Thompson on his first day as chairman was the corporate equivalent of having a biohazard symbol stamped on his resume. No major airline would touch him. He ended up as a consultant for a small, struggling cargo airline in the Midwest, a humiliating fall from the heights of first-class travel and 7-figure bonuses. He spent his days in a drab office haunted by the memory of a complaint letter he had dismissed as trivial. Captain James Holloway's fate was subtler but just as profound. He was called to a meeting at the new Sky Globe Airlines headquarters, now being run by a crisp, efficient executive handpicked by Xavier. He expected a reprimand. Instead, he was met with cold, hard data. An analysis of his record showed a pattern of backing his crew in customer disputes, leading to an unusually high rate of passenger compensation and formal complaints on his flights. He was presented with the video the fashion model had taken, which had since been acquired by Onyx's legal team. The new head of operations looked at him across a polished table. "The issue, Captain, is not that you made a mistake. It's that your judgment is fundamentally flawed. You saw a conflict and you chose the path of least resistance for yourself, not the path of justice for the customer. You deferred to a prejudiced employee without any critical thought. You are a liability we can no longer afford." He wasn't fired. He was offered a choice: accept a demotion to a desk job managing crew schedules or take early retirement. At 58, his pride wouldn't let him accept the demotion. He took the retirement package. He spent his days on the golf course, a man who had commanded giant machines in the sky, now unable to command respect forever, knowing he had grounded his own career by deplaning the one man he shouldn't have. Xavier had wrestled with what to do about Diane Foster. Firing her was easy, but it felt incomplete. He wanted the lesson to be learned, not just the problem removed. The new management at Sky Globe, under Xavier's directive, brought her in for a formal review. They showed her the video. They showed her Xavier's original complaint. They showed her a file thick with prior minor incidents and complaints from other minority passengers that had been previously dismissed. Her defense was weak and tearful. She was stressed. She had personal problems. She was just trying to enforce the rules. You weren't enforcing the rules. The new HR director, a sharp black woman named Kendra Williams, told her coolly, "You were enforcing your own biases. You looked at Mr. Thompson and you didn't see a first-class passenger. You saw a threat to your sense of order. That is not a correctable training issue. That is a fundamental character flaw. We are terminating your employment effective immediately." However, as per Xavier's instructions, she was provided with 6 months of continued health insurance coverage for her family, including her child with medical needs. The termination letter made no mention of this accommodation. It was delivered as a standard part of the separation package. Justice with a measure of mercy. Diane was escorted out of the building she had worked in for 20 years. But her story didn't end there. This is where real life, in all its brutal viral cruelty, took over. A disgruntled former Sky Globe employee, someone who knew the whole story, leaked it to a popular aviation blogger. The story was irresistible. Airline Karen-kicked billionaire off flight loses him the entire company. It went viral. Soon, major news outlets picked it up. The fashion model, seeing the news, released her video to TMZ. Suddenly, Diane Foster's face was everywhere. She became a meme, a symbol of entitled prejudice. People found her social media profiles. She was doxxed, harassed, and threatened. She had to move out of her apartment. No other airline would hire her. No customer-facing job was possible. The scarlet letter of her viral fame was indelible. Months later, a local news station in New Jersey ran a follow-up piece. They found her working as a cashier at a discount grocery store, looking tired and broken. "I made a terrible mistake," she wept on camera. "I judged a man by his appearance. I let my own biases get in the way. I never imagined something like this could happen. I just want my life back." When Xavier saw the segment, he felt a strange, hollow ache. He had wanted justice, and the machinery he had set in motion had delivered it with an interest rate he had never intended. This public evisceration wasn't what he had wanted. It was ugly, chaotic. It was the loud outcome he despised. That evening, he made a decision that surprised even Olivia. He instructed his personal foundation to anonymously provide a full college scholarship for each of Diane Foster's 3 children. It wouldn't undo what had happened to her, but it would ensure that her mistakes didn't limit her children's futures. It was a private act of grace that no one would ever connect to him, a counterbalance to the public consequences of his pursuit of justice. The transformation of Britannic Holdings Group under Xavier Thompson's leadership was swift and comprehensive. His first actions as chairman were strategic, rather than punitive, focused on creating lasting value, rather than settling old scores. Within his first month, he implemented a complete overhaul of the company's corporate governance. The bloated board of 16 was reduced to a nimble 9, with Victoria Harlow installed as lead independent director. The new directors brought diverse perspectives and expertise in digital transformation, international markets, and organizational change areas where BHG had desperately needed fresh thinking. Xavier personally led a thorough review of every business unit in the Britannic portfolio. Some decisions were straightforward. Britannic Maritime, the long-struggling shipping division, was sold to a Greek shipping consortium for £1.2 billion, immediately strengthening the balance sheet. The luxury hotel chain, still a prestigious brand despite underinvestment, received a $300 million capital injection for renovations and expansion into emerging markets. But it was Sky Globe Airlines that received Xavier's most personal attention. He poured hundreds of millions into modernizing the fleet, improving cabin comfort, and revolutionizing staff training. The old Sky Globe logo and livery, stodgy and traditional, were replaced with a sleek contemporary design that symbolized the airline's rebirth. Most significantly, Xavier established the most rigorous, comprehensive diversity and respect training program in the aviation industry, developed in partnership with leading civil rights organizations. It wasn't the perfunctory slideshow that most companies used. It was immersive, challenging, and mandatory for every employee, from baggage handlers to executives. The program included realistic scenario training, unconscious bias workshops, and regular follow-up assessments. Those who couldn't adapt to the new culture were not welcome in the transformed organization. Yet transformation wasn't always smooth. During a board meeting 3 months into his chairmanship, Xavier faced unexpected resistance to his reform agenda from an unlikely source, Victoria Harlow. "We're moving too fast," she argued during a heated discussion about the company's new diversity initiatives. "The old guard is pushing back. Middle management is confused about priorities. We're creating unnecessary friction." Xavier was surprised. Victoria had been a staunch ally during the takeover. Now she seemed to be advocating for a more gradual approach. "Friction is inevitable during transformation," Xavier countered. "If we slow down, we risk losing momentum." "There's a difference between momentum and recklessness," Victoria replied sharply. "You're treating this like a sprint when it's a marathon. Some of these changes need time to take root." The boardroom fell silent. No one had challenged Xavier so directly since he had taken control. After a moment, Xavier nodded slowly. "You may have a point. Let's take this offline and review the implementation timeline." Later in a private meeting, Xavier asked Victoria directly, "What's really going on? You were all in on these changes during the takeover." Victoria sighed. "I still am. But I'm closer to the ground than you are, Xavier. I'm hearing from people at all levels of the organization. There's fear, confusion. Change is necessary, but traumatic change creates resistance." "So what do you suggest?" Xavier asked. "The same changes, but with more communication, more involvement from middle management. Let them help shape the implementation. They'll be more invested that way." Xavier considered this. "You're right. I've been so focused on the what that I've neglected the how." He looked at her with newfound respect. "Thank you for having the courage to push back." This exchange marked an important evolution in Xavier's leadership. He had won control of BHG through strategic brilliance and force of will, but maintaining that control and using it effectively required a different set of skills: listening, collaborating, adapting. True transformation wasn't a unilateral process. It was collective. Xavier also established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students aspiring to become pilots, engineers, and aviation executives, creating a pipeline of diverse talent that would reshape the industry's future. The program, named First Class Futures, quickly became the gold standard for corporate diversity initiatives. He promoted Victoria Harlow to CEO of Britannic Holdings Group, and she became one of the most respected executives in Europe. Under their partnership, BHG transformed into a model of 21st century corporate governance, more profitable, more innovative, and a better place to work. The financial results spoke for themselves. Within 18 months of Xavier's takeover, BHG's stock price had increased by 47%. The pension fund was fully funded for the first time in a decade. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. What had once been a sluggish conglomerate trapped in the past was now a dynamic enterprise embracing the future. Yet for Xavier, the most meaningful changes weren't reflected in the financial statements. They were in the everyday experiences of employees and customers who no longer faced the subtle or blatant discrimination that had once been tolerated. African executives were no longer asked if they were in the right cabin when boarding first class. Flight attendants no longer selectively enforced baggage rules based on a passenger's appearance. Customer complaints about bias were taken seriously and addressed promptly. The culture had fundamentally shifted. This was Xavier's true monument, not a skyscraper with his name emblazoned in gold, but a transformed organization where everyone was judged solely on merit and treated with equal respect, regardless of background. 6 months after the takeover, Xavier gave a rare interview to the Financial Times. When asked why he had targeted Britannic Holdings specifically, he offered a carefully worded response that revealed nothing of the personal motivation. We identified a well-positioned but underperforming conglomerate with strong assets and weak leadership. The opportunity to create value through better governance and strategic focus was compelling. This is what Onyx does. We find potential where others see only tradition. The reporter pressed him. Some say you have a personal vendetta against Lord Cavendish. Any comment on that Xavier's expression remained impassive. I've never met Lord Cavendish before the extraordinary general meeting. This was a business decision, not a personal one. It was technically true. He had never met Cavendish prior to the showdown. The personal motivation stemmed from Sky Globe's treatment of him, not from any direct interaction with the former chairman. The real story remained known only to Xavier's inner circle. Most assumed the takeover was just another brilliant strategic move by a legendary investor. Only a handful of people understood that it had begun with a first-class seat, a briefcase under a seat, and 4 fateful words. It's always people like him. 1 year after the takeover, Xavier boarded a Sky Globe Airlines flight from New York to London. The experience could not have been more different from his previous attempt. The newly rebranded airline had undergone a complete transformation from its visual identity to its corporate culture. The sleek new terminal at JFK featured digital check-in kiosks and welcoming staff trained in the new customer service protocols Xavier had personally approved. The first-class cabin had been redesigned with a subtle aesthetic that emphasized comfort and functionality rather than ostentatious luxury. As Xavier settled into Seat 2A, the very seat he had been denied a year earlier, he noted with satisfaction how the flight attendant greeted every passenger with the same genuine warmth regardless of appearance or attire. Jasmine Rodriguez, the lead flight attendant, approached him with a professional smile. Mr. Thompson, welcome aboard. Can I offer you a drink before takeoff? Perhaps champagne, or would you prefer something else? The contrast with Diane Foster's condescension could not have been more stark. This wasn't deference to his status as chairman. Jasmine treated every passenger with the same respectful attention. This was exactly the culture Xavier had aimed to create. Water would be perfect. Thank you, he replied with a slight smile. As he sat there, Xavier noticed another passenger across the aisle, a young black professional in casual clothing being seated in first class. The flight attendant was polite, helpful, and entirely unremarkable in her treatment of him. No questions about whether he belonged there, no extra scrutiny of his boarding pass, just the same courtesy extended to every passenger. It was a small moment, but it represented everything Xavier had fought to achieve, a world where dignity wasn't determined by appearance, where respect wasn't rationed based on prejudice. As the plane took off, Xavier looked out the window at the sprawling lights of New York City below. He hadn't just bought an airline. He had bought the power to ensure that what had happened to him would never happen to anyone else on this carrier. The victory didn't taste sweet like revenge. It tasted like justice, quiet, structural, and absolute. But transformation was not without its challenges. Despite the outward success of BHG under Xavier's leadership, internal resistance persisted. Some veteran employees resented the changes to how things had always been done. Others felt loyalty to the old regime or feared their own positions might be threatened by the new emphasis on diversity and performance. During a management retreat 6 months into his chairmanship, Xavier addressed these concerns directly. "Change is uncomfortable," he acknowledged to the assembled executives. "It's supposed to be. Comfort is the enemy of progress, but I understand the anxiety it creates." He paced slowly across the front of the conference room. "I've heard the whispers, that we're moving too fast, that we're dismantling traditions that served us well, that American-style management doesn't translate to British institutions." He stopped and surveyed the room. "Let me be clear. We're not erasing history. We're making it. We're not dismissing tradition. We're creating new ones. And principles like accountability, fairness, and respect aren't American values. They're universal ones." This speech marked a turning point. By acknowledging the resistance openly rather than pretending it didn't exist, Xavier diffused much of its power. By articulating a vision that honored the past while embracing the future, he began to win over even some of the skeptics. Beyond Sky Globe, the entire Britannic Holdings Group had undergone a remarkable transformation under Xavier and Victoria's leadership. The old headquarters in London, a Victorian edifice filled with portraits of previous chairmen, all white, all male, had been sold. The company now operated from a modern, energy-efficient building near Canary Wharf. The corporate culture had shifted from hierarchical to collaborative. Decisions that once required months of committee meetings now happened in days. Innovation once stifled by tradition was now actively encouraged and rewarded. The shipping division had been divested, the proceeds reinvested in high-growth areas like sustainable hospitality and next-generation air travel technology. The hotel chain had been revitalized with eco-friendly renovations and cutting-edge digital services. Most importantly, BHG had become a leader in corporate social responsibility. The company established transparent reporting on diversity metrics, environmental impact, and ethical governance. What had once been a bastion of old-world privilege was now at the forefront of new-world progress. For Xavier, this transformation represented the fulfillment of the promise he had made to himself on that day at JFK, standing on the curb after being removed from Flight 347. He hadn't just exacted revenge on those who had wronged him. He had created lasting, meaningful change that would benefit countless others who might have faced similar discrimination. It was a reminder of the two kinds of power in this world: the temporary, brittle power of a uniform or a title, the power to humiliate, to exclude, to enforce petty rules, and true power, the power of capital, of strategy, and of unwavering will. The power to not just win the game, but to buy the entire stadium and rewrite the rulebook. Xavier Thompson hadn't just wanted an apology. He had wanted to create a world where one wasn't necessary. His story stood as a reminder that the person you underestimate today could be the one signing your termination papers tomorrow. The transformation extended beyond BHG's corporate structure to the lives of those involved. Victoria Harlow, once marginalized on Cavendish's board, was now recognized as one of Europe's most innovative CEOs. The new executive team, diverse in background and perspective, had brought fresh ideas that propelled BHG to the forefront of its industries. Former employees who had been afraid to speak up about discrimination under the old regime now found themselves in an environment where their voices were valued. Many wrote to Xavier personally, sharing stories of how the culture change had affected them. One flight attendant, a black woman who had worked at Sky Globe for 12 years, sent a particularly moving letter. "For the first time in my career, I don't have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. I don't have to worry about whether a passenger will respect my authority based on my appearance. The change isn't just in policy, it's in the air we breathe at this company now. Thank you for making this a place where I'm proud to work." Messages like these confirmed for Xavier that what he had accomplished went beyond business strategy. He had changed lives. One evening, exactly 1 year after the extraordinary general meeting that had changed everything, Xavier sat alone in his office at Britannic's new London headquarters. The space was modern and understated, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Thames. On his desk was a report detailing BHG's transformation over the past year. The numbers were impressive: stock price up 47%, employee satisfaction up 32%, customer loyalty metrics at all-time highs. But it was the qualitative changes that meant the most to Xavier: the culture shift, the renewed sense of purpose, the creation of an environment where merit trumped prejudice. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Victoria Harlow. "The board meeting preparation is complete," she said, "but there's something else I thought you should see." She handed him a tablet displaying a news article. The headline read, "Former Sky Globe flight attendant Diane Foster establishes anti-bias training program for service workers." The article detailed how Foster, after her very public downfall, had channeled her experience into creating a program that helped service industry workers recognize and overcome their unconscious biases. She was working with community colleges and vocational schools, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. "I learned the hardest way possible," Foster was quoted saying. "I lost everything because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. If I can help others avoid that path, maybe some good can come from my mistakes." Xavier read the article twice, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. There was a certain poetic justice in Foster finding redemption by teaching others to avoid her errors. It represented something he hadn't anticipated: the possibility of genuine transformation, not just for institutions, but for individuals. "Interesting," he said, finally handing the tablet back to Victoria. "Does it change how you feel about what happened?" she asked. Xavier considered the question carefully. "No," he said after a moment. "Justice isn't about feelings. It's about consequences and change. Foster faced consequences. Now she's creating change. The system worked." Victoria studied him. "You know, most people in your position would have just sued and taken the settlement." "I'm not most people," Xavier replied simply. "No," Victoria agreed with a slight smile. "You're certainly not." She paused at the door. "By the way, I heard something curious from our education foundation. Apparently, Diane Foster's 3 children have all received anonymous full college scholarships. Wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Xavier's expression remained neutral. "The world works in mysterious ways sometimes." After she left, Xavier returned to the window, gazing out at the London skyline, now glittering with evening lights. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from that humiliating walk down the jet bridge to this office overlooking one of the world's great cities. He thought about his mother, who had taught him that dignity was non-negotiable, about Diane Foster, whose biases had cost her everything, but who might yet find redemption through helping others, about Lord Cavendish, whose arrogance had blinded him to the changing world around him. And he thought about the countless passengers who would never know his name, but who would benefit from the changes he had implemented, passengers who would be judged not by their appearance, but by their boarding pass. The next morning, Xavier boarded another Sky Globe flight, this time returning to New York. As he settled into seat 2A, he noticed the small details that reflected the airline's transformation. The diverse crew, the subtle redesign of the cabin, the atmosphere of professionalism and respect. A young flight attendant approached. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Welcome aboard. May I offer you a drink before takeoff?" "Water, please," Xavier replied. As the flight attendant moved away, Xavier overheard a conversation in the row behind him. A young black executive was being welcomed warmly into first class, his boarding pass checked without a hint of suspicion, his bag stowed without comment. It was a small moment unremarkable to most observers. But to Xavier, it represented everything he had fought to achieve, a world where dignity wasn't determined by appearance, where respect wasn't rationed based on prejudice. He closed his eyes as the plane began its taxi toward the runway. There was a certain symmetry to this journey, returning to New York in Seat 2A, the very position that had been denied to him a year earlier. But this wasn't about occupying a seat. It was about transforming the aircraft, the airline, and the corporation that owned it. Xavier Thompson had not just claimed his rightful place. He had changed the very definition of what that place could be for himself and for countless others who would never know the role he had played in their more equitable treatment. As the plane lifted off, soaring above the clouds toward New York, Xavier felt something he rarely allowed himself: a moment of genuine satisfaction. Not in the defeat of his enemies, but in the creation of something better than what had existed before. It was never about revenge. It was about revision, rewriting the rules of a game that had been rigged for too long. And in that, Xavier Thompson had succeeded beyond measure. 1 year to the day after Xavier Thompson took control of Britannic Holdings Group, a small ceremony was held in the Sky Globe Airlines Training Center in New York. The occasion was the graduation of the first class of cadets from the First Class Futures program. 25 young men and women from underrepresented backgrounds who were beginning careers as pilots, engineers, and aviation managers. Xavier rarely attended such events, preferring to work behind the scenes, but he made an exception for this one. Standing before these young professionals, he saw the future. He had been building a future where opportunity was based on talent and determination rather than privilege or appearance. Today marks not just your graduation, but a new beginning for this industry, he told them. Each of you carries the responsibility to maintain the highest standards of excellence, while ensuring that every one colleague or passenger is treated with equal dignity. Never forget that true authority comes not from a uniform or a title, but from competence and character. As he watched them receive their wings and certificates, Xavier thought about the journey that had led here. What had begun with a moment of injustice had culminated in a structural transformation that would benefit generations to come. The final victory wasn't in punishing those who had wronged him, but in creating a world where such wrongs were less likely to occur. Later that evening, as Xavier's car took him back to Manhattan, he looked out at the airport in the distance at planes taking off and landing, each carrying hundreds of people with their own stories, their own struggles, their own potential. Among them would be passengers who, because of the changes he had implemented, would never experience the humiliation he had endured. They would never know his name or role, but they would benefit from his refusal to accept injustice as the price of doing business. That Xavier Thompson decided as the lights of the city came into view was the true measure of power, not what you could take away from others, but what you could build for those who would come after you. Not revenge, but legacy. If this story of justice, transformation, and dignity resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that inspire change. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that underestimating others can have profound consequences. Remember, true power isn't about enforcing rules, it's about rewriting them for the better.